Totems changed in Preludes 15, and after seeing how strong they are, I decided to wait for the inevitable nerf before making an updated totem guide. But that nerf still hasn't come, so I went ahead and started testing, and of course I found some interesting interactions, and, well, things are way weirder than I expected. Totems are doing a lot right now, so this video will probably go out of date pretty fast, and that's a good thing. As I record this audio, we are in Preludes 15, Hotfix 14, and you might hear from future Sarah if we get more hotfixes while I work on the editing. I'm certain we'll see some changes eventually, it's just a matter of when, so if totems are already different by the time you see this, consider it a historical record of Soulframe's pre-alpha development. Totems are weapon modifiers you get when you release animals from Odin cages or charm an animal with your Fipple flute. There are 6 different animals that can give you totems in Preludes 15, and they each tend to hang out near their natural habitats. Beavers and ducks can be found around rivers, ponds, and coastlines. Squirrels, rabbits, and deer can be found in meadows and forests. Rats can be found in villages, forts, and the undercity of Durmak. And all animals except rats can be found in the glades of Andoran. Each animal can give you several different totems, and which one you get seems to be completely random. Totems also have virtue attunements, which we'll get to in a moment, and which attunement you get is supposedly also random, although it certainly seems like some combinations are significantly more rare than others. Unfortunately, my data here is not especially robust because I've actually been avoiding totems ever since I managed to get at least one of each type for testing purposes. I really enjoy the mechanism for charming animals and don't have the heart to walk away from animals in a cage, but the totem interface really needs some work. All totems with the same animal and attunement look identical, so trying to figure out which totems I have and which I still need is quite tedious. Plus, having to release extra totems one by one while being careful not to accidentally release a grip-type specific totem is very frustrating, especially given how the totems can randomly reorder themselves in the interface. So, until we get some visual indicators for the different varieties of totems, or at the very least the ability to sort totems by name, I'm going to be content with what I have and try to avoid collecting any more. Most totems are universal, meaning they can be equipped on any weapon type. Very rarely you can find a grip-type specific totem which will be slightly stronger than a universal totem but can only be equipped on weapons of their type. Charming a rare animal will no longer guarantee receiving a rare totem, and I am not certain if this is a bug or if the rarity of totems and animals is no longer intended to be linked. All totems can be upgraded with Harmony, a resource you gain through releasing duplicate totems and runes and through playing perfect notes and bonus notes while charming animals. Each totem slot is aligned with a virtue, and while you can equip any totem in any slot and still get the base bonus for that totem, putting a totem into the slot that matches its virtue attunement will enable virtue scaling, meaning the bonus it offers will get stronger as you have more points in that virtue. You can only equip one totem of each type at a time on each weapon, regardless of which virtue it's attuned to, but you can equip the same totems on your main weapon and sidearm. Equipping a rune on your weapon will unlock one additional totem slot and a virtue determined by that rune, but these bonus slots do not benefit from virtue scaling. This is probably a bug, so check the pinned comment for updates. Actually, that's going to be true for a lot of things we'll talk about, so yeah, in general, keep an eye on that pinned comment. Alright, let's talk about what totems do. Instead of going through them by animal, I'm going to group totems by function, because all of our current totems can fit pretty nicely into one of 5 categories: armor totems, explosive totems, heal totems, utility totems, and buff totems. Let's start with armor totems. First in this category we have Stocky Lodge, which gives you an armor buff after using a rune. It lasts for as many seconds as the amount of armor it gives you, and will work even when you're not using the weapon you equipped it on. This is true for almost all totems, so from now on, rather than telling you when a totem does work on your sheathed weapon, I'll tell you when it doesn't, or explain when it works differently depending on which weapon it's on. For example, our other armor totems, Armor Coat and Servid Ward, give an amount of armor per rune charge. These will check the rune on the weapon you equip them on to determine how much of a buff you should get, So if I equip Armor Coat on my main weapon and Servid Ward on my sidearm, Armor Coat will give me physical armor based on how many charges I have on my main weapon rune, and Servid Ward will give me magic armor based on how many charges I have on my sidearm rune. But both will work all the time regardless of which weapon is active or sheathed. Most of the time. Sometimes these totems seem to bug out, and I have not been able to figure out exactly how, when, or why. In this test, using only totems to increase my armor for Rumthumb, my damage increases as I drop rune charges. There are so many different reasons this could have glitched out. I swapped loadouts with my runes already fully charged, so it's possible the game was incorrectly calculating charges, but I also had the same rune on both my main weapon and sidearm. The vast majority of our totems do seem to stack with themselves when you equip them on both weapons, such that from here I'll be clarifying which ones don't stack, but I'm not sure if that's related to my buggy Rumthumb results or not. Without the ability to see these armor values anywhere in-game, since totem armor won't show up in your arsenal and you can't check your armor rating out in the world, I just wasn't able to definitively determine what was bugged or how it was bugged. So for now, my opinion on armor totems is that they're great when they work, but you won't always know when they do. Next, let's take a look at explosive totems. Bandicoota Blast will cause a wave of AoE stagger on smite procs, but in co-op it seems to trigger on any attack. Hair Harms causes an AoE damage proc centered at the enemy when you pull a smite, so if the enemy is already dead, you won't get an explosion. Binky Kick causes AoE damage centered on your envoy when you pull a smite, and if you're using Duello and have Duo Duello active, your shadow will also get its own explosion. And Thundertail deals AoE stagger on rune use, and this totem does so much stagger that everything is instantly open to finishers. It is incredibly powerful and ridiculously so when paired with Ode Tempest. But really, all of our explosive totems are a bit too much for Soulframe. Sure, they look cool and sound great and are fun as a standalone game mechanic, but they don't really fit with Soulframe's combat. In fact, Soulframe doesn't have much combat if you're using these totems, so I really hope we see some changes here. Next we have our heal totems. River's Revive gives you a heal over time on rune use. The heal is not quite as strong as Sympathy was in previous Preludes, but you do have control over when you use it, so this is definitely a good healing option. Dabble Dredge gives you a single heal when you pull Smite, and while you do have to proc Smite before you can get the heal, the amount of healing you get is quite strong. If you're playing solo and struggling to survive, equipping either or both of these totems will help tremendously. Heal Preens should be good and works alright in solo play, but in co-op the amount of healing gets split up amongst all allies, so the larger your squad, the worse the heal, which makes this generally inferior to our other healing totems. My first thought upon discovering this was that a better way to offer party healing would be using Dabble Dredge along with Sprout Spring, which is the first of our utility totems. This totem's item card says it offers a chance to spread the effects of Pull Smite to all allies. Unfortunately, Sprout Spring does not actually share totem effects that trigger on Pull Smite. Instead, it gives all allies a chance to receive a rune charge when you pull Smite, and this too seems to be bugged in co-op, as Skull here was receiving several rune charges for each Smite I pulled. It also seems to allow squad members to see and pull each other's smites, which is normally a co-op bug only for clients, but with Sprout Spring, the host will also share smites. And there are quite a few more interesting bugs in our utility category. Blinding Bite will cause an AoE blind on smite procs that shares an animation with Pictrix Powder, as well as the somewhat unreliable susceptibility to stealth multipliers. Future Sarah here. It turns out several multipliers just aren't applying when they should be, so this is probably not a bug with the totem, but with the game in general in P15H14. More on that later. Draft Dam decreases rune drain, which means it increases the duration of Durglant, Flit Smoke, and Tree Fell. This works as described when it's equipped on the same weapon as the rune, but when it's equipped on your sheathed weapon, the effectiveness is less than you'd expect with virtue scaling active, but more than you'd expect without any virtue scaling at all. It does still work though, so it can be especially helpful for Flit Smoke. Spreading Sploot will cause your pulse smites to proc smite on nearby enemies, and this is very strong when it works as intended and ridiculously overpowered with co-op bugs. Spreading Sploot can sometimes proc smite on enemies who have already had their souls pulled from a normal smite proc. And as I mentioned earlier, in P15, clients in a squad are able to see and pull smites from all party members, including smites spread through Spreading Sploot. With a large enough group of enemies, the number of smites you can get in one fight is extremely large, which will have some very entertaining implications when we get to our buff totems. Far Foul will increase your pulse smite range, probably. This one was pretty hard to test because Soulframe's softlock system also affects pulse smite, and there were situations when I was definitely in range of a soul but still couldn't pull it. I did notice an increase in smite range when I had the totem equipped on my active weapon, but I'm still not entirely sure if it's working when equipped on my sheathed weapon. The times when it seemed not to be could have been because of difficulty with target lock. Lingering Litter is supposed to increase smite duration, meaning an enemy's soul would be exposed and available to pull for longer. This would be very helpful to some of our buff totems if it worked. Unfortunately, it is currently bugged and does not do anything. Moving Musk deals damage and drags your enemy towards you when you pull a smite. The damage appears as a separate proc and ignores enemy armor, so it is especially helpful on weapons that attack quickly but deal less damage and thus get heavily punished by Soulframe's armor system. The pull also makes for nice CC in melee combat, so this totem is especially good on short blades. Turn Tusk causes foes to become allies after you pull their smite, and this can be a nice form of CC when you're fighting enemies tough enough to survive having their souls ripped out. Hollow Herd creates a decoy on pulse smite, and those decoys do a pretty good job of drawing aggro. My only complaint about this totem is that the decoys will block arrows. This makes Hollow Herd a very good totem for melee combat, but I find it pretty annoying in ranged combat. Our last utility totem is Quick Dray, which increases attack speed for all weapons except bows when you pull a smite. It always buffs the weapon it is equipped on, but it will buff that weapon regardless of whether it is active or sheathed when you pull the smite. Unless you have it on both weapons, in which case it bugs out and sometimes only works on one weapon and sometimes doesn't work at all. Finally, let's look at our buff totems, starting with Diving Drake, which increases damage dealt by pulse smite. Once again, the damage appears as its own armor-ignoring proc, so this is another totem that is especially helpful on fast weapons with lower damage per hit. Arcanic Gnaws will buff all arcanic damage dealt to enemies with a vulnerable soul, meaning their smite has been procced but not yet pulled. As far as I can tell, all sources of arcanic damage will get this buff, including Alka's Breath and Archstorm. Voltaic Scurry works the same way but buffs voltaic damage, so this is a good totem to pair with Odiak or with Flyblades using Whirlwind. Dewclaw is supposed to buff all rune damage, but when P15 first arrived, it was stacking infinitely with itself, making it way too strong. Unfortunately, the hotfix that was supposed to fix it just broke it entirely, so it currently has no effect. This will be a great totem once it works, but for now it does nothing. Smiting Stag gives you an increased smite chance per banked rune charge, and this totem is probably working as intended. You will not benefit from a Smiting Stag on your sheathed weapon, even if that weapon has full rune charges, so only your active weapon counts here, but it really counts. The smite chance increase is very strong, giving us a nice incentive to build around saving rune charges rather than using them up. And at last, let's talk about the most overpowered totem in Soulframe right now, and if you aren't about to hear from future Sarah, I am genuinely surprised. Noble Nestling will buff your virtue associated with each smite you pull. So, a red soul will buff your courage, a green soul will buff your spirit, and a blue soul will buff your grace. In theory, anyway. This doesn't always seem to work that way in co-op. The amount of virtue you get scales with the virtue of the totem, provided it's in the correct totem slot, but this scaling gets a bit buggy at lower values and sometimes becomes 0. But none of that is what makes Noble Nestling so OP. The secret to this rat's power is its ability to stack with itself. Noble Nestling buffs your virtue by a percentage that scales with your virtue, and if you proc enough smites and get lucky with which virtues get buffed, you can reach some delightfully high values. How high? I'm actually not sure because it seemed like the virtue values might not be displaying properly on item cards in my inventory, and it's hard to be certain even about that because I couldn't necessarily see which virtues each pull smite was buffing. In most of our extreme tests, I was pulling smites as client in a squad because I had to rely on my allies to proc a smite so that I could spread it with spreading sploot to get more smites without spending my Fellus charges. I'm sure you can see where this is going. With all 3 virtue potions active on a full Grace Tethran build, I used Noble Nestling to buff my Fellust, then prepared all my stacks, refreshed our enemies, and pulled an absolutely ludicrous amount of smites from them, an unknown number of which buffed my Grace. Then Cammy and Skull buffed me with Bravada, and Spring Roll bestoned my target with Oshelda, and I landed an Alka's Breath headshot on a bestoned enemy for 3,683,292 damage. But something just wasn't adding up. When we tried again to best that number, the damage results we got ended up somewhere around 100,000, even when we had much better luck with our smites, or at least seemed to. After a ton of testing trying to figure out what was going on, we noticed that when I took this shot for 137,430 damage, I had 690 grace. That math does not check out. Something must have surpassed a limit somewhere and the game just said, no, you can't do that. And I don't think that's a bad thing, but the process of figuring all this out was very frustrating. Future Sarah here. I went a little nuts trying to figure out why we couldn't replicate that 3.6 mil shot, and I think the problem might not have been a limit. After even more testing, I discovered that not only do inventory item cards sometimes give you false virtue values, but Call of the Ancients sometimes doesn't buff damage like it's supposed to. My guess is that all multipliers are just generally breaking sometimes, and this is also why both Pictrix Powder and Blinding Bite don't always get their stealth bonuses. And when I hit that 3.6 mil shot, I just got lucky and had everything actually working all at once. But if I'm ever going to finish this video, I need to let it go and get back to editing. Soulframe's combat possibilities are rapidly becoming more complex, and while this is wonderful for the game, players need better testing tools. There are too many values we cannot see in-game, too many stats that are hidden, too many mechanics that are not explained or don't work as described. Setting aside all discussion about how much the game should be explained to the player versus discovered through gameplay, what we have right now would be much more approachable for everyone if we had better tools for testing. Because as much as I enjoy laughing with my friends about making big numbers, my priority is understanding how things work so I can explain it to all of you. And when the game mysteriously disables mechanics or functions differently based on several hidden criteria, my ability to do that is severely limited. So while I'm sure more balance changes are imminent, I hope they come with better testing tools. If you found this video helpful, please toss it a like, and thank you for watching it, especially if totems have already been changed again by the time you see it. Let me know in the comments what your favorite totem is, and until next time, happy hunting!